am I going to pass this exam or not? Just speak to your doctor first, because there is a fee that's associated with it. So it would be better to find out, before paying the $100 for it, roughly. And it does need to be renewed every 2 years. Lastly, the discharge book. So this is also sometimes referred to as the seafarer's passport, but not to be confused, you can't actually use this to travel around the world, but instead it's a book in which seafarers keep the official records of their sea time and the descriptions of their voyages.
Before we continue, I'd just like to say that we have a resource document that will be sent to you at the end of the presentation. So you don't need to take notes, or we're just doing an overview, so it might be overwhelming, but you'll have the notes after. And I know for the marine medical, I think there talks about being renewed every 5 years. So I don't know if it's official yet, but eventually it's probably going to be renewed every 5 years. So that's less paperwork to worry about.
I think you're right, Amélie, on that. And that's, I think, and that is specific to working in the Great Lakes, where a lot of commercial ships are.
Yeah. So to be continued.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about STCW Med training and licensing. First, we're going to start off with the STCW. That is your standard training certificate for watchkeeping. And MED is your marine emergency duties. STCW and MED, if you take the courses, very, very, very similar, almost the exact same. The main difference is that the STCW is internationally recognized. That means that you can get a job in the United States, in Europe, in the Caribbean, pretty much anywhere in the world. You will have, if you have that qualification, you can get a job on any ship. MED is for working Canadian coastal waters. That is only Canadian recognized. During this course, you will do an overview of what to expect when you arrive on a ship as far as orientation and training, how you should always be trained, where your muster station is, where all your safety equipment is, so on and so forth. Then you will jump into doing survival training, so you'll get to learn how to deploy life rafts. You'll usually hop into a pool, get into that. I went to one that has crazy waves, and they even have fake thunder and lightning and crazy fans going, and it's really wild. And so you really feel like you're in an emergency situation and like you're lost in the ocean when it's super rough and at night. And you learn how to work with your team and keep hold of each other, keep track of each other and all that. And then you'll do your basic marine firefighting. And that'll just be a couple days of in-class learning, where you're learning about the different foams and different extinguishers. And then you'll do a day of practical training at a firefighting school or in a fire safe facility. Next is your marine basic first aid. Just like most of your other first aid courses, you'll go over CPR, broken bones, just kind of your basic first aid stuff. But with your marine basic first aid, you're going to learn about how to handle this at sea. So often there'll be time delays because you might be out in the middle of nowhere. Maybe no one's going to be able to reach you. Maybe you're a week away from the nearest port. You'll learn about working with limited resources and helicopter rescue. Next would be your restricted operator certificate marine for M, and our restricted operator certificate for marine commercial. If you plan to go into commercial shipping or commercial fishing, you'll need the CM. If you are going to probably work on tall ships or sail yachts and stuff like that, the ROCM is just fine. And that is just if you're going to be using a VHF radio at any time. So even if you're just going to be tendering back and forth, or if you're going on a long kayak trip, this is something that you should be able to use efficiently. Next is your marine firefighting. In your STCW or MED, you will get the basic one covered. If you do choose to get your bridge watch rating, which we'll talk about a little later, or go into officers' roles, you will need to get your advanced firefighting, which is the same amount of practical time. It's just an extra 1 or 2 days of in-person, in a class setting learning.
So that's me. doing my firefighting. You really do feel a bit badass when you're doing that. Well, yeah.
And that's my marine navigation class this year taking the program. And I second what Amélie said. You feel pretty good taking it, but it's hard work.
Okay, now what sort of costs you should expect for those trainings? Now there's different ways to go about these trainings. Some people choose to do them like all at once because they have the time available in their schedule and they have the funds available. Some people decide to do just what they need and to do them progressively. And some people actually have these trainings paid by their employers or their schools. So it's really important that you evaluate like your priorities for the jobs you want, which you should do first. Do you really need them all, or could you find a job opportunity that could pay for these trainings for you? But let's say you want to do them by yourself independently, which is sometimes the case for tall ships. STCW Med, it can go between like $1,100 and $2,000. For a marine basic first aid, it's around 140 and 200. For ROCM, I think it's around $200, but for commercial, it's more around $800. And for the advanced marine firefighting, it's usually around $1,200. And just so you keep in mind, all those certifications have to be renewed eventually, except the ROCMC or ROCM, that's lifetime. But all of those you need to take after, I think it's 5 years for most of them, a refresh. So that is to be considered in the funds too.
But thankfully, there's a lot of financial aid options out there because as we just seen, depending on your situation, it may be pricey. So there's a few different options that you can look at, and one would be enrolling in an academic institute. This is a really great option if you're seriously considering this because the cost of the training and certifications will most likely be built into your tuition. And the benefit of that is that then the schools often offer bursaries and scholarships, and that can make your tuition cost next to free. And that's especially true if you identify a woman as or Indigenous, because we're trying to get more people involved in the marine careers. And to go along with that, then that also opens you up to the Canadian student loans and grants. So a loan, eventually you'll have to start paying that back when you finish your studies, but a grant is essentially free money that's given out to students to help you get by. You can also look at tall ship organizations. After you work with them and spend some time and sort of prove your dedication, approach them and just ask if they would consider helping you fund some of these costs. You'd be surprised, quite a few will, because they're willing to trade that little bit of money for them is worth it to get a well-trained, safe crew member. So it really is a fair trade. And then your other option would be to look at third-party organizations that offer other bursaries and financial aid. And my best advice to that is just give a quick Google search, see if you can find anything in your area, see if you meet the prerequisites and if it applies to you. But by all means, if you're having trouble, reach out to us. We're more than happy to send you a list of places you can try, or try to get you in touch with some of these organizations.
There we go, try again. So listed here is a bunch of the marine schools and training centers in Canada. These will all be included in the resource document sent to you after the presentation today. I did, however, want to mention that programs like the Picton Castle Bosun School, super great program. You're not going to get an STCW or anything out of it. However, they teach lots of hands-on traditional seamanship skills, and that program, Picton Castle, is internationally recognized as one of the best sail training organizations in the world. They really know their stuff, so it is a really great program, and I'm going to give them a little shout out because I love them. They are offering a bosun school this year with full scholarships in Nova Scotia. And on the bottom, NEMO, the Northeastern Marine Online, that is a US academy or institute, but they are offering All your STCW courses that you could ever imagine, every single one is online. It's USCG, so US Coast Guard approved. If you are American or dual citizenship, you will get the USCG certification. But if you are doing this outside of the US, you will get a STCW certificate, and that is valid anywhere in the world. Something to consider if you get certifications in the United States. They can be a little difficult. Lots of Europe doesn't recognize it. They kind of consider it to be a little lower of a standard than the rest of the world. But if you want to sail within the United States or Canada or Caribbean and stuff, getting the certifications through them is also a really great option.
Okay, how to find opportunities, mostly on tall ships, but also on other types of boats. There's not a good way, there's various different ways. The first thing I did when I came back from my first sailing trip was to just follow every single tall ship page I could find on Instagram or Facebook. And sometimes these pages are announcing that they are searching for crew members, and usually most of them specify exactly what you should have for those positions. So that's a very good thing to be just keeping an eye on. Of course, internet, so like research job opportunities on tall ships. There are like the tall ship websites. A lot of time they have details about their crew and their experience and if they're searching for crew. Walk the docks if you have the luck to be near a port. Just walk the docks and have conversations with seafarers. It's a good way to have some tips. Same thing with word of mouth, especially for tall ships. It's a very like niche community, if I want to say it. So people start to know each other, and your word can be like transmitted to somebody else, and you find opportunities that way. Good thing to keep in mind: first impressions, very important. Even if you meet someone and you want to apply for the ship where that person is coming from in 3 years, do a good first impression. That will help you a lot. A good thing to know for tall ships is they sometimes require you to spend some time with them before actually giving you a job, just to get to know you, and for you to see if you like also that ship. So most of them will ask you to volunteer before working for a certain amount of period. Some will ask you even to have been a trainee before being able to volunteer and then finding a job. That's something that's seen too. And some will ask you to take part in yard periods before volunteering or working. So yard periods is the period where you do most of the maintenance of the ship, and it might sound less exciting than sailing, but it's really during that type of period that you learn a lot about the ship and how it's built and where the lines go and why, and functions of blocks and that kind of stuff. So it's actually a very good learning opportunity. And one thing I did when I started to look around on tall ships, and I didn't know, okay, what do I need to get on tall ships? Because it's such a precise thing that if you look at Transport Canada's website, you're not going to have details specific to tall ships. So it might be a bit vague where to look. Well, I looked at a job position that I wanted, and I just sent an email and I expressed my interest, and I said, what do I need for that position? And that answer just gave me an idea of where should I be headed for training. So never hesitate to contact a ship you want to work on and ask them, if I want to be a deckhand, what do I need to work with you?
So opportunities in Canada, and this is not just specific to tall ships, but it kind of covers a broad scale. So yeah, we're pretty lucky to be in Canada because we're surrounded by so much water, and thus, there's a lot of opportunities out there. But some things for you to consider would be researching tall ships or getting into the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, joining the Royal Canadian Navy or the Canadian Coast Guards. And the benefit of the latter two is that once you're accepted into their program, they actually are paying you to go to school. They'll cover your food, they'll give you an allowance, and they'll actually give you a job upon completion of the program as well. Some other things to look into: working on cruise ships or ferries, tugboats to bring in those big commercial vessels, fishing vessels if that's what you tend to lean more towards, boat building and architect if you tend to like the more the land-based side of things. Also working at a marina is a great way to even get into the industry. Just, pumping fuel, handling lines, you can make a lot of great connections that way. And also marine tourism. That's a really awesome job: whale watching, fishing charters, stuff like that.
Opportunities worldwide. So for tall ship sailing in particular, Sail Training International is lots of the time a really great resource. They don't always have a very up-to-date website. However, there's always people putting up ads for saying, like, I want to volunteer, or I'm looking for a vessel that I can work this position. And I know that there are vessels looking at that as well. So even if vessels aren't posting that they are looking for this on this website, they are always checking those. Ships' websites, there's usually a careers page or a join us page, and that's worth taking a look at. On Facebook, there's the Tall Ships Opportunities group, and that is a public group, and that in the last few weeks especially has been very active. There's lots of opportunities around. It's really awesome. Often ships will post on their Facebook or Instagram if they're looking for crew. And some others that are not necessarily tall ship related. And these ones are just like anyone can post to these who has a boat. Some of them will be businesses, some of them will be just maybe some random people that got a boat in Hawaii and now want to sail across the Pacific and are looking for a crew. But so do use those with caution. Just make sure you're actually talking to these people, getting to know them a little bit before accepting a job and racing off somewhere to join a random boat. But Blue Water Yachting, crewfinder.ca, Indeed is pretty reliable. It's lots of the commercial fishing, ferries, lots of everything else except for tall ships there's lots of on there. Ships and Sea Jobs on Facebook, there's a lot of active posts on there. And if you're leaning towards cruise ships, allcruisejobs.com is a really great resource.
And now, like I said earlier, I want to touch on the subject of the United States because it's a bit different. Like we mentioned earlier, they have different certification systems for sailing. So that's why most of them are not recognized by people like other countries using the STCW standard. So most of the time in Europe, actually, like they're rarely accepting like US crew members on their ships for that reason. And the US maritime industry must comply to what is called the Jones Act. So it's a law that requires that all goods, shipping, or transport of people in the US waters must be executed on ships that are built, owned, and operated by United States citizens or permanent residents. And that also applies to volunteer opportunities. So even if you go to volunteer on a ship because you cannot be paid in the US, they could say to you that you are stealing an opportunity from an American person. So you are allowed to sail on a US vessel outside of US waters, or on a foreign vessel in US waters, of course with the right paperwork and all, but you're not allowed to sail in the US on a US boat in US waters. So if you do want to sail on a US boat, because they're pretty cool, I experienced it, make sure that you embark as a paying passenger for a short period of time, so like a summer, and that you have proof of that payment to show to the custom officers when you go, because then you're going to be considered like a tourist, so you're not going to be considered like you're stealing anyone a job. And you can talk to the officers of your boat, so maybe they could write you like a sea time letter, because you're still going to be actively sailing. So just to keep in mind, for the US, it's to use with a lot of caution. But you can still have a look at the Tall Ships America billet bank for open positions to see the ships that are looking for crew. And also on that website, they have some American ships that are going worldwide. So on those, you'd be able to sail. So please be careful with US boats. And with all of what we just mentioned, there's a certain caution to be kept in mind when you're choosing an opportunity. Like Leticia mentioned, for the yachts, you can have all types of people posting for jobs. And there are people out there that say that they have more experience than they actually have. So this is a sort of checklist of questions to ask your officers or the people that are employing you, to just make sure that you're heading to a good place. Just keep your well-being in mind when you choose a boat. So what I do when I have a opportunity on a boat is have a meeting or a call with the officers. Sometimes you would talk with board members of an organization. That's okay, because they'll be able to answer your questions most of the time. But I do prefer having a talk with like captains or mates, because they're the ones operating the vessel and they're the ones that you're going to be working with. So that's a preference I have. The types of questions that you might want to ask: are there any costs? So are they paying for your travel expenses, or are you going to have to pay for them? Is the ship giving you food, or are you going to have to find food yourself at some periods or throughout the whole contract? What is the expected schedule? So are you working, let's say you're more shore-based or like day sails kind of ships? Do you have days off? What are the travels and when you should be expected to arrive at some of your ports? If you travel around the world, are there any travel visas that you might need to have? Are there any insurances that you should take concerning certain countries? More concerning, like working on the deck, what are going to be your duties and responsibilities? What do they expect you to do and expect you to be qualified at? Living quarters, like is it a cabin? What sort of room do you have, storage to put your stuff when you arrive? What is the watch system like? Is it 6 hours on, 6 hours off when you're doing transits? Is it 4 hours on, 8 hours off, that kind of thing? How is the crew? So how many people are in the crew? What sort of roles, hierarchy is in function on the ship? Do they have any reference? So a legit ship would have no problem referring you to a reference. And if we're talking about a ship that is elsewhere, so let's say a Dutch ship, you could also ask for a reference that, like another sailor that comes from the same country as you, because that person could also help you with some more travel visas, paperwork, and that kind of stuff. Or just look on social media and find people that have been in their crew in the past and go and ask these people questions. How was their experience on the ship? The people in the tall ship communities are pretty happy to talk about their experience in general. So you're probably going to get a very honest answer from those people. And the last thing is more for you give a good first impression when you talk to the officers, is ask learning information about the ship. So the sail plan or the pinrail plan. So where are the lines on the ship? So that way you can prepare and have an idea of where to go when an order is asked.
I also just wanted to add in, sorry, Amélie, along with the travel visas, when talking to them, if you're going to be traveling around the world, travel vaccines. Some countries will require you to have certain vaccines to enter. And is that going to be covered by your organization or company, or is that something you're going to have to cover on your own?
A very legit ship is going to be very organized with that kind of information. So
Awesome. So next is essential gear. This varies depending on the kind of vessel you're on and where you're going. I've been on tall ships that don't have a washing machine, and we've gone out for a month, and I've been on ships that we have a washing machine and we go out for 2 weeks. So it really varies. If you are going down to Antarctica, you're going to pack something completely different than if you're going to be staying in the Caribbean or Mediterranean. But this is like a general packing plan. Socks and underwear for the days at sea, plus a few extra. Some work pants, preferably not jeans. If you are a like professional crew member, there may be a uniform and that should be provided for you. But not all vessels require you to wear a uniform, especially while at sea, maybe just when entering and leaving ports, but not jeans. If you get them wet, kind of hard to get out of. If you fall overboard or something, it's going to be a little bit more difficult than if you have like loose pants on. 3 to 5 work shirts and some base layers, long johns or leggings. Those are perfect for night watch, like super important. Hats and toques, a couple pairs of shorts, pajamas, some nice shore clothes, and space is usually pretty limited, so pack as light as you can.
Another subject to touch on, part of clothing, is the weather gear. So you have to be equipped for some like heavy weather, rain, that kind of stuff. So of course you want to have good rain boots, rain pants, and a rain jacket. Sometimes people like to have gloves too, to keep their hands dry while they work in the rain. So you might see on internet that like Helly Hansen has some really nice sailing gear that looks very, very nice. You look like a badass in them, but it is pretty expensive. And the reputation it has that it doesn't work for more than 2-3 years, depending on how much you use it. And you have also very affordable rain jackets. So like the yellow one on the screen, I bought it for like $40 and it is very good. So of course it doesn't look as nice, but it is very, it's very performant. It's very good. So don't think that you have to get the super expensive gear for the weather gear.
So, toiletries and medications. The most important thing on this list is do not forget to pack your personal prescriptions and medications. It would be really awful if you got out to the middle of the ocean and you realized that you don't have something that's essential to your health. Also, seasickness medication. Maybe you don't get seasick, but you don't know, and it doesn't hurt to have it just in case. Other stuff like your glasses, sunscreen, those can get overlooked, but also very important. Maybe a pair of shower sandals if you're going to be showering in a public facility. And other than that, just your daily hygienic products.
So for sailing gear, this one is really specific to just like tall ship sailing, and this really depends on the role that you are going to be hired into. So for your rig, which is usually a marlin spike and knife, usually in a leather little casing, that is pretty standard part of your uniform. Some ships don't require it, but will ask you to bring like a little pocket knife or something. Some ships don't ask for it at all, but quite generally that is part of your uniform. You're going to want to have that on you. If you're going to be working aloft or working with trainees, or you have lots of projects during the day, you don't want to keep running around back and forth to keep getting a knife to cut this and then go back to do what you're doing. You want to have your knife on you. So if you do get a job in the sailing industry, just get used to having that attached to you pretty much at all times. Do not put that in your carry-on luggage. That is really important. That is going to get taken away from you. So definitely put that in your checked luggage. Another thing to keep on you is like a pen and notepad. If your officer or bosun is talking to you and giving you a list of duties for the day, write them down. If you need to draw something out and plan stuff, that's super handy to have on you at all times. A head torch, really, really nice to have one with a red light setting, because you don't want to blind your crewmates at 3 o'clock in the morning with a bright white light. They are not going to appreciate that. The rest of these are more if you're like leaning into a bosun role or officer role, you're going to want to have like your own personal ditty bag with all these in them. So that'd be like a sewing palm, sewing needles, beeswax, thread, marlin. Marlin's just like the gangent, the black string that is used on most vessels, and tarred marlin is kind of like a tan kind of string, super thick, super durable, not gonna break. And that one's just kind of waxed over more, so it's really not gonna get any rot, and that's gonna last a long time. A seizing mallet, a fid, crescent wrench, and hockey tape. Most of this stuff will be provided on the ship, but I do personally like to keep my own supply just in case we run out or I need to go working aloft. I can just take my ditty bag and I know that I have all the things I'm going to need and I'm ready to go. Don't need to mess around looking in the locker to fill another bag.
Now for the fun stuff. Most all ships are pretty happy to have someone playing musical instruments on board. So I do love to travel with my fiddle. Just keep in mind that music is for when you're at port, not traveling, because when you are traveling, there's pretty much always someone sleeping on the boat. So don't disturb their sleep. A camera, you're gonna have probably some very nice sceneries along the way. So you wanna have a camera if you'd like. A GoPro is pretty good for capturing nice action sequences when you need your both hands on lines. Some small games, sort of like cards and that kind of stuff. Artistic supplies if you like to draw or if you like to write. Costumes if you're heading for festivals, like especially in Europe, I know festivals are pretty festive. So sometimes it's something that is on the ship. So if you're lacking some storage in your bag, that should not be one of your priorities, but if you have room, I mean. Some speakers, if you're doing mostly yard work, having a little Bluetooth speaker for when you're working, some ships be pretty okay with you using that. Some snacks, pretty good to have some snacks along the way. A battery if you want to recharge your phone, because there will probably be some instances at sea where the electricity will be limited. And headphones if you want to listen to your music. Just keep in mind that for safety concerns, on some ships it is required when you are in transit that you do not wear headphones to hear any safety alarm that might go off. So just keep that in mind.
Some paperwork management tips. When you get certifications like your STCW or advanced firefighting, make a copy of it. That's super important. One gets lost, one gets ruined. Have another paper copy, and I personally like to have another copy just saved to my computer, because then I can also just send that off to where I'm applying to, or I have access to it whenever I need. The next one is sea time. Your captain or officer is most likely keeping track of all the sea time that's happening on the ship. 1 sea day by regulation is 8 hours of watch. So that's important to keep in mind. And also something I learned very recently is if you are working on a vessel that is like actively voyaging, going in the water, moving around, doing something, not one of those historical ones that sits at the harbor for 10 years. But if you're on a vessel that's going to be moving, your yard time does count as sea time. So that I just learned. So I have another 2 months of sea time that I didn't even know I was getting. So that's super great. And you do need to keep track of your sea time for when you want to get certain certifications. And that will be listed on your institute website, whichever institute or school you decide to go to. Helm time is, I always forgot about it, didn't even know until last year that you need to keep track of this. But this is your responsibility to keep track of. Your officers, your captain, no one else is going to keep track of this. They will often, at the end of your contract, be like, hey, what's your helm time? So they can write a testimonial for you. Qualifications, like for getting your officer's tickets and stuff, will need an X amount of helm time for you to qualify. So that is on you to keep track of.
And we'll go into more types of career that you could go to.
So commercial career paths. This is best suited, maybe you're looking to work on the really big ships, you're interested in getting into cargo or research vessels, car carriers, stuff like that. I just want to say that I'm just scratching the surface here. There's so much to talk about. And say if you want to be on a cruise ship versus a cargo vessel, the dynamics of the crew and what it takes to manage that vessel is very different. But just to outline a few here, you might consider working in the deck department. This is something that I'm actively chasing right now, doing marine navigation. So you can start out as a deckhand, work your way up to a third mate, eventually get to the chief mate or first officer, who is actually the person under the master mariner or the captain, and therefore the second in command. Maybe you like to fix things, you're more hands-on, you like to put things back together. You can work in the engineering department. As an engineer, an oiler. Also, I'll mention that now ships are, aside from tall ships, modern ships are basically big floating computers. So there's actually a job called an electrotechnician, and you're working with all the ship's electronics, which is super important because we rely on those so heavily as a navigator. Another option would be to work in the stewards department. With that, you could be a steward, the ship's cook, stuff like that. Some other things I want to mention, I just have here. There's also so many shore-based jobs, stuff like I mentioned kind of earlier, but stuff like naval architecture, shipbuilding, welding, like the list really goes on. But yeah, we'll provide some more information in the resource document if this is something that interests you. Another option on the other side of things is sailing yachts. So this is really good if you want to work on offshore doing voyages or deliveries, or maybe you want to buy your own sailboat one day and sail around the world. I recommend the Royal Yachting Association. They have a training scheme that's internationally recognized, and it's pretty good. The problem with that is that they're based in the UK, and so we have less of their training facilities here in Canada. They're not impossible. They do still exist for sure. You can still achieve that here. It's just a little bit harder to come by. So for example, through the RYA, you can get an introduction doing a competent crew course. This is kind of your beginner knowledge. Work your way up to a day skipper. With that, you can sail on small pleasure yachts 3 nautical miles from land during the day. And on the other hand, like a Yacht Masters Ocean, that allows you to sail on these vessels worldwide. And this is also great if you're looking to get into, so sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. Super yachts was what I wanted to say. This is also a great route for that.
Now, if we're talking more about tall ships, these are the kind of roles and positions that you should expect to have on the boat. So this varies depending on the size of the boat, the size of a crew that can live on it. So some crews have way more than that, and in some other crews, people are actually doing multiple duties as one person. But you usually have a captain. Like, that's pretty standard. That person is the first in command. You have a chief engineer, or just engineer if there's a single one on the boat, that supervises the engineering department. You usually have a first mate, sometimes called a chief mate. That is the person that is mostly responsible of like getting the captain's order towards navigation on the deck. You have a second mate, a boatswain, or that's the short for boatswain, who is responsible for the maintenance of the ship and its equipment. Then you have the deckhands, which are operating the lines. Sometimes they are referred to as able seamen or ordinary seamen in some countries or some ships, depending on the experience that you have. So when you start in the tall ship world, sometimes you might not want to know exactly what role you'd like, but the more you get to know about ships and sailing, the more you'll figure out what is best for you.
So some of the challenges you might face as a sailor, disconnection between boards and crew. That's something I've personally experienced, where the board is really wanting to do day sails and do things to earn the organization money, which is great, but the crew really want to focus on sailing, which is what they're there for, and building connections with community and people, and just kind of getting to experience all of the sailing, all the fun part, not necessarily the customer service part. So there's often disconnection between boards and crew, but not all the time. For tall ships especially, number of applicants. Lots of ships have a ton of applications coming in, so we'll touch on this a little later, but you're going to want to write a really good resume and cover letter. If there's not a lot of applications and you see that this organization or company is posting all the time looking for crew, that might be a red flag. If there's a high turnover rate, they're maybe not the best place to start and go work for. So that's something to consider as well. Language and different nationalities. Sometimes it's just really difficult to work with people from other countries. I was working on a Dutch tall ship. Really great experience, one of the highlights of my life. But Dutch people have a pretty crazy temper sometimes, and that's something I've really noticed while sailing on board. And that's just cultural differences. Not saying it's okay, but there is going to be differences, and you need to either be ready to be okay with that or find a different vessel to work on. Payment. For tall ships in particular, you're not coming into this industry to make money quick. You are going to make peanuts, pretty much. It's not a lot of money, but you are here for the experience, and this is what you love doing. You love this hands-on work. You love where you're going. You love the community and the connections you're building. That's personally why I'm here. But if you go into commercial fishing or shipping or onto the ferries and stuff, you're probably going to make a pretty reasonable amount of money, or Coast Guard or Navy. Physical work. Working on ships, regardless of what kind of vessel it is on, it is physically demanding. If it's between long days or lots of hands-on work, it can be very long, it can be very tiring, but it is really rewarding. And especially in tall ship sailing, you need to be willing to always be learning and adapting the way you're doing things. Every ship has a different way of doing things. There's a million ways to do it right, but there's usually only one or two ways that you can really do it wrong. But different ships will have completely different expectations. So if I'm doing an eye splice or something, I'll check in with my first mate or bosun, and I'll be like, how would you like this finished? Because there's many different ways to finish all these projects. The last thing is mental health. As much fun as sailing can be and how rewarding it is, sometimes it's a struggle. I lived on a ship with 80 people, and we had an entire month where we didn't get to see anyone else, and it was great. But some of those people are really hard to work with, and you need to be able to really take a look at yourself and what you need. If you need an hour because you're about to have a breakdown because the job you're doing is just too exhausting right now, I mean, situational awareness, if this job needs to get done now, get it done. But if you have someone you can hand it over to, take that time for yourself. It is really important that you figure out what you need and take the time to be able to get that.
Another thing that might be worth asking to your officers when you contact them is what the living quarters look like. So for most of the times on tall ships, it depends on the vessel, but don't expect anything super comfortable. Those were my living quarters on Lynx. So lots of stuff hanging above my head, and the bed is very small, very tiny. So that's something you can inquire about when you choose a ship, but just expect that it's not going to be a queen bed, obviously.
Maintenance, if you're signing on to a ship for a pretty long amount of time, anything like 3 months or over, they're usually going to have a maintenance period. And so that is lots of long days. We're currently 6 days into finishing ours. It's been a long 2 months, but this is a really great way to get to know your ship, get to know where all the lines go, as Amelie has mentioned before. I've learned a ton of terminology that I've heard over the last 10 years, but I didn't actually know what it meant. Now it all makes so much sense. So it's not what everyone is looking forward to when joining a ship, but it is a really important part. And honestly, it is a highlight. It's a lot of fun. You learn a lot of really incredible skills. And there's really no app for this. You're not going to learn this anywhere else. So really take advantage of the opportunities that you have. Next is seamanship. Seamanship means a ton of different things. It's anything from the hands-on skills to working as a team, being able to live well with your shipmates. You don't need to be the best at tying knots. I am not, but I can do a really good whipping. So it's all about learning your strengths and weaknesses and being able to grow from them, as well as being able to help your crewmates out. If you're a good crewmate, your crewmates are going to be good to you. It's something to keep in mind is always shipmate, self. Shipmate, self. That's a tongue twister. Take care of the ship will take care of you, take care of your shipmates, they'll take care of you. And yeah.
You're also going to learn personal development skills at sea. I like to live by the quote, if your dreams don't scare you, they aren't big enough. And what I mean by that is, if I'm being honest, every time I join a ship, I'm incredibly nervous, especially if I'm taking on a new role. But I see that as a way of growing. It shouldn't discourage you. I know it can seem daunting, but just try to work through it. You're going to learn stuff that you can take back with you, either on land or just carry on with you throughout your whole life. So I've got a few photos here that I'll talk about. And in the first photo there, that's me on Blue Clipper, a tall ship, and I'm hanging on for dear life, rightfully so, because that's my very first climb ever. And in the second photo, that's the German vessel Alexander von Humboldt. And I'm up in the rigging quite high, more comfortable this time, working with our bosun. In the third photo, this is aboard the Spanish flagship Attila. And on this vessel, I was working as a watch leader. And that's actually the participants that in my watch that I was responsible for. And I love this photo. It's so important to me because all of those people were just like me on my very first day. They were so nervous to go up there. But eventually, with a little encouragement and practice, they got up there. And I just love it so much because I know how much personal work they had to put in to achieve these goals and make that happen.
Another thing that is incredibly positive about working on tall ships is the travels. The people you meet during the travels, it's lots of different cultures. You're going to see some incredible sceneries like sunsets on the oceans that you cannot see if you just stay on land. And you're going to see some wildlife. I saw whales a couple of times, dolphins, a lot of seabirds. So it's very incredible to just be so close to that nature. And usually they get pretty close to the tall ships because if they're sailing, they're not making as much noise as a commercial vessel. So you're actually closer to them. It's really cool.
And people, or as I like to call it, family. In my personal opinion, hands down, the best part of pursuing a career is the people that you're going to meet. You're going to get to experience so many different cultures and food and ways of life and points of view. And these are connections that at least a handful of them will stay with you for your whole life. And I think that that's something that you just can't get anywhere else.
So next we'll just go over quickly good resume and cover letters. These are super important, especially if you are applying to a company or organization that you don't personally know them or haven't worked with them or sailed with them or anything before. So first, I think is the most important. Some people have had different experiences, and that's great, but I've always been taught that avoid using to whom it may concern. One of the captains I previously worked with, he said if I ever saw that opening up a cover letter, I don't even read it. It goes in the garbage. So do your research. Figuring out who you are writing to is really important. What he also said was, if you write to my operations manager or social media coordinator, that's fine, because at least you're finding someone in the organization to write to, and at least you've done a little homework, and it shows that you actually care about getting this job. But try and avoid using "to whom it may concern." I'm writing you today applying for. That is just really boring. So instead, try to use that first sentence with just grabbing their attention. Like, I'm really excited to be or applying for this organization. Your cover letter is really a good opportunity for you to show employers who you are. It gives them a good sense of what kind of person you're going to be. So really, like, talk about yourself. Boost your ego up a little bit, but don't boost it too much. You want to be honest with them, but are you a great team member? Are you a really like confident communicator? What skills are you really good at? I'm really good at whippings and wire splicings. I can't tie my knots to save my mother's life. I struggle with knots so much, and I'm not afraid to admit that to them. Because then it also shows that you are willing to grow from this experience, that you're not coming into it saying, I've done this, I know everything, because you don't. Doesn't matter if you've done this for 5 years or 1 year or 35 years. Like, you don't know everything. You never will. So it shows that you're willing to learn, and that's something that they're really going to care about. Don't repeat your whole resume onto your cover letter. That is what your resume is for. So if you have relevant experience, by all means, like, share it. Talk about it. Talk about how it's helped you, and that's great. But don't repeat the whole resume. They don't want to read your resume twice. And if you have any connections within the organization, mention that. That never hurts anyone. Next is for resumes, especially, I don't know, everyone's work experience, obviously, but it's okay to have it 2 pages, especially as us as young people. Our experience is like pretty limited. We don't have a whole lot to choose from yet, so I just have everything down. I was going to share a picture of my resume, but I couldn't figure it out. But I have everything sectioned off into like a marine section. This is my maritime experience. Then I have my food and service experience. On the side, I'll have my volunteer, and then I'll have my education and qualifications and references. If you don't provide references, that's one more hoop that the organization or company is going to have to climb through. And that's more work for them, and that may not work in your favor. So don't give a bunch of references if you don't want to, but I definitely recommend do not leaving that blank. Keep it in chronological order. So 2021, 2020, whatever your experiences are. Keep it professional. I've seen lots of resumes that my friends have asked me to look through where they're trying to be charming and cute and maybe drop a couple jokes in their cover letter and resume. And I recommend saving that for the interview. But keep it professional, keep it clear, nothing fancy. Choose a nice bold font, but don't choose a cursive writing font that no one's going to be able to read. And I definitely recommend sharing it with a family member, friend, or coworker. Get a second pair of eyes to look over it for you.
So we're getting to the end of our workshop. So if you could please go to shipstoshores.ca/survey to complete a survey to say that you completed this workshop with us. That helps us a lot for seeing if we are achieving our goals as a project for Ships to Shores. So Nira, could you share it in the chat if it's not done yet? I don't see the screen. But yeah, we're going to share it in the chat for you to have a easier access. So we'd just like to ask if you have any questions. We have very limited time because we're already over. These are our informations as presenters. So if you have any like personal questions regarding like the experience we shared, like you can totally write to us and we'll help you. Keep in mind that we're sending this resource document with pretty much everything we presented for you to have. But if you have any questions now, feel free. Jai, you have a question?
Thank you, Amélie. Yeah, great job, everyone. That was really good. Round of applause. So informative. So I had just one question. I was looking at some of the Sail Canada courses for, keel boats and just for cruising. I was wondering if you guys had any opinions on those and like what the availability looks like around Canada, that kind of stuff.
I can maybe start if you girls want to complete after, but after my first sailing trip, I did okay, that was in French, so I might not be using the right name, but like elementary, like the first course of Sail Canada certifications. And it helped me a lot just for the terms and the language and getting to know how the lines work. Because obviously when you're going to a tall ship, it's going to be bigger, but it's basically the same way of functioning. I think that helped a lot. But that's the only thing I've done so far. I haven't pursued the rest of them. Just that course was fine for me. But I think it is worth it.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. So if nobody else has questions, very nice of everyone to listen to us. If you have any questions regarding the tall ship industry or any other industry, you can totally send us a message or like either on email address with Ships to Shores or like on Facebook. We'll be very happy to help you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you listening and your time. And hopefully this was helpful to at least a few of you.
Have a nice evening or whatever time zone you are in.
Thank you.